This is The Cross Section with Nate Lull and David Edelstein.
Big decision this week was the New York State, the governor's office, saying that schools will reopen this fall. Carefully, they put the qualifier there, so we still have yet to see all the details or most of the details, but that's kind of the decision that we've been waiting for as sports reporters, because we know how much that decision will have an impact on whether sports do come back and what they might look like on September 21st.
Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't see that decision coming from the governor. I thought maybe we would go a different way. It's exciting. As you and I have talked about, there's still a lot of hoops to jump through, and I will still be a little surprised, I think, if when school gets here that we're actually going. And I know it's up to each school, and each school will have a different plan, and et cetera, et cetera. But I was still a little bit surprised. Were you?
I wasn't necessarily surprised because kind of what everyone's been telling me when I interview them is like, there's no room left for surprise, right? It's just, I'm not trying to predict anything anymore. We're just trying to see, something's going to happen. Either it's going to go one way or the other way and just act on it going forward. So less surprised, but more, just interested in the fact that the decision was made to open schools. And obviously that's the goal. New York's been in a pretty good place, we've heard from some of the people we've spoken with and health officials compared to other areas of the country. And so, it allows them to maybe come back in some form. I don't know if we have all the details on what that looks like, whether it's half and half, like half online, half at home, switching back and forth, whether it's, do they all come back, or are they coming back, but only mostly online? So there's a lot of details left to figure out about that. But we did know that it was going to be kind of this decision tree, is the way that I've been phrasing it, of a domino effect of decisions that would have to happen to get up to what athletics would look like. Because the superintendents and athletic directors were all telling me from different school districts that sports were not involved in their proposals to reopen schools that the governor's office was considering. Of course, those were due on July 31st. We didn't hear the advice on August 1st, the next day. It's going to take them some time. So we heard it on Friday, August 7th, the last day of that week, where Governor Cuomo said that it would be announced. But no, I'm not surprised. I'm just interested in what this means going forward, and not trying to make any predictions, but trying to kind of see what all the different avenues are as I continue talking with people about what does this mean for high school sports coming back, which is still really not officially decided. It's just kind of, we're one step closer maybe.
I think it goes back to exactly what you and I talked about in March and April, that we've heard Dr. Zayas say it a million times, that you can't predict anything. You can't try to forecast this. You just have to kind of take it as it goes. My gut feeling, not that I'm going to try to predict this year, but if things keep going on this trend, I could see maybe where each school, this is something they talked about at the beginning as well, would get to make their own decisions. So maybe one school is comfortable doing a little more than another school. Maybe neighboring schools get to play each other. Maybe it's just practicing and scrimmaging. It really could be up to each school and their administration and their school boards. But very interested to see where it goes from here. I think I was kind of surprised because I put it out there, and some of the feedback I got was, I said, hey, this is a positive step. This is a good thing. If you're hoping for sports, the door is not shut. It's still open a little bit, and maybe we'll get something. And I got a lot of people reminding me, which I already knew, but hey, there's still a long way to go. There's still a lot of hoops to jump through, school plans, et cetera, et cetera. So like you said, a long way to go, but a nice glimmer of hope nonetheless.
Yeah, I had spoken with the superintendent of the Rome City School District most recently after this decision was made. And I asked what his thoughts were about athletics, because it wasn't part of the plans. This is not the focus of what schools were doing. And he said it's still not the focus of what schools are thinking about when they're reopening is athletics. They need to get back to school. They need to figure out how that's going to work and what those details are. There's still a lot to go. It's August 9th, and there's still a lot to figure out in that regard, which is exactly why the NYSPHSAA, New York State Public High School Athletic Association, decided to delay fall sports until at early September 21st from their August 24th date. Specifically, Executive Director Rob Zayas had said to me that it was because he knew that schools would need that time to figure it out. Once the governor gave the decision, which we now know was this Friday, August 7th, the schools are going to need time to figure out what that looks like for them individually and, on a regional level and going forward. And then you can see how athletics plays into that. There was a survey that was done in June by the New York State Public High School Athletic Association prior to their first COVID-19 task force meeting that included the 6,000 superintendents, athletic directors, coaches, athletic trainers, about whether they thought that, all their different thoughts about coming back to sports. And one of the things they said in that survey showed was they had them rank from 1 to 7 the most important aspects that they needed in order to return to sports. And number 1, overwhelmingly, was that students needed to come back to school. So when you take that bit of information, that's what kind of gives me the decision tree, we know what the order is going to be here. With everything in the big picture, it's, the governor's office, it's state health and education, they all need to figure it out. Then the schools need to figure it out, how they're coming back. Then they need to come back. Then we need to figure out what the rules are for coming back for sports, because that still wasn't even the thought yet, because the first thought was, are we coming back? Now we know, one thing at a time. And then it's like, what does it look like and what do we do? But so a lot of the reaction that I've seen, while there's still basically just as many question marks in the air about what this even looks like come the end of September, there's nothing planned out yet. There are no details there except for this is the date we're aiming for. It's just a target. But having that decision, which was in that survey, the people involved in sports and school administration had said, hey, coming back is actually the most important thing to us in order to get back to sports. That's where I think there can be a little bit of a sense of positivity heading forward here.
And building on that, I don't know what you've been hearing, but I hear a lot of the plans down here are, maybe a set of students goes Monday, Tuesday. Wednesday is a day where the school building is closed and they do a deep clean, you do virtual, and then maybe Thursday, Friday, another group of students comes in. I've heard maybe all virtual for high school, but they find that it's very, they really want to bring the elementary kids in and try to get them into the building because they feel that that's really necessary for the basic skills, the reading and the math, try to get them in-house for that face-to-face learning. So I guess sports-wise, I'm very curious about, okay, if you're coming to school Monday, Tuesday, the rest is virtual, or Thursday, Friday, the first half of the week is virtual. How is that considered back in the building? Is that based on the survey, like, hey, is that enough for us to have practices or get together and do something or play the next town over? I think that will be something that will be interesting to see what they do with it. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that it comes down to the schools, and I remember just a few weeks ago we had spoken with the NFHS Executive Director, Carissa Niehoff, and she had said that from a national standpoint and the national guidance that's being provided, that virtual learning entirely is considered being back, and it would be up to the state to decide, does that mean that they'll be able to come back to practices and have games or, the interscholastic kind of athletic competition. And so we still have yet to see what those decisions are, and we still have yet to see what the final decisions are and how everyone comes back. And maybe not every school district might even come back in the same way. There might even be more question marks now that a decision has been made. That weird situation where, okay, schools will come back carefully was the decision by the governor's office. And now it's like, okay, now it's not just go back to the online learning that we actually got used to a little bit at the end of the year. Now we're coming up with a whole new plan, and there are 50 more questions, or maybe probably more, to answer on that. But, the athletics, again, is the later decision. But the one thing from the superintendent of the Rome City School District, what he said was, his exact phrase was, he's very optimistic, he said, that you could get back to, quote, some sort of competition this fall, unquote. And that leads me to think these conversations that I'm also having with colleges about what they're doing now that fall sports have been delayed. What are they doing? What is that some sort of competition? That new phrase that I've been hearing all the time could just be when we might not be thinking about fall sports on September 21st being, all right, we're getting right back to football games, or we're getting right back to soccer games, or whatever it is, field hockey. It might be you'll get some sort of athletic participation, but it's just going to be practicing with your own team, because that's manageable on a scale of 15 players on average, let's say. And we can manage that within the district. You're not crossing town lines. We're not going head to head with anyone, literally, in football, I guess, and soccer too, with all the headers. But that it's maybe something can come back, but that hasn't even gotten there yet, because then the sections have to figure out the state has to figure out what they want to do. Then the sections have to figure out what they want to do. The school districts have to figure out what they want to do. And then ultimately, as I've been hearing, it comes down to whether the parents and the student athletes want to even participate in this kind of environment.
Yeah, it could be very interesting where one school is full steam ahead and another school doesn't want to. I'm also interested in the small schools that we cover. If you leave it up to the athletes, how many, if you're right on the line, say you need 11 guys for soccer and maybe only 8 say, hey, I'm comfortable, my family's comfortable with me coming back, and then you don't have enough for a quote-unquote team to play anybody. So, again, are you just practicing, scrimmaging? At this point, are student-athletes happy to just go up to the school and kick the ball around or throw it around or go for a run or whatever? It's tough, and I think it's been tough, too, because I hear this from a lot of people. They'll say, hey, Nate, you're out covering travel baseball and softball. What do you see in there? How is that going? And from what I've seen, it's been pretty well done. And at least the places that I've gone, they haven't had any problems. Everyone has followed the rules. So, on one hand, there's this model that's working, but I also know that when you kick that up and there's more people involved and more rules, et cetera, that gets harder to do. So it's just hard because we're right in that middle spot where you just don't know what's going to happen. Things could happen, they might not. It's just the waiting game continues as it has since March.
Yeah, it's a lot about, it is interesting, because I was going to ask you what you've seen from these different summer leagues that you've been covering. I know that I briefly was at some of the summer leagues here that had started in early July, that we have these leagues coming back. And I think that does dictate a little bit of parents and student athletes wanting to participate, and that they are, and that it's happening. But on the interscholastic level, there, it's a lot more intricate. There's a lot more of the moving. But for whatever reason, it's been determined that is like the one sport that couldn't come back. Like college has found a way to somewhat come back. The pros are already back, and then youth sports and basically summer pickup leagues are back. But high school sports is the one thing where you're involving school, and the reason for that, which again Carissa Niehoff had given us, she said that's because it's an education decision. But now the education decision has been made, which is the tied decision was, were they going to come back to schools, and in what form do students need to come back or not to allow for some sort of athletic participation. And so now that decision has been made and will continue to be made. It makes me wonder, though, especially what you think too about, I've talked with so many people with one question of how long would it take to prepare to be ready for a season of any kind. Executive Director of Section 4, Ben Nelson, said, I think in 2 weeks we could be ready. Executive Director of Section 3, John Rathman, said, some fall sport coaches aren't even hired yet. And actually right here on the cross section that day when you were covering the one of the summer league baseball teams, and I spoke with, in studio here, I spoke with the Proctor girls varsity basketball head coach, Crystal Bass. She also said she works for the district, and she wasn't even hired yet as a winter sport coach, and that could potentially be the next thing up if they start on time at the end of the fall / if they move to the January start. So I'm wondering, how long does it take to prepare now? What are your senses just of how the story's been playing out? They're targeting September 21st, but here on August 9th, which, it seems a good 5 weeks away, but it seems like with so many decisions left to be made about everything first in that decision tree, that there might still be room for another pushback just because of how much time it takes to figure this out.
Yeah, I've been curious about that as well. And I wonder if some schools, we keep hearing about how budgets are getting cut everywhere. I wonder if they're trying to play the waiting game and, hey, if we don't have to hire a coach for the fall, then we can save X amount of dollars. Mm-hmm. So I've been curious about that because I've heard that down this way too. Maybe not varsity in every situation, but modified coaches that might change up more often, or JV coaches or something like that. Yeah, because then you're scrambling. Say the season is going to start and we get to go ahead on the 21st, and, athletic directors all of a sudden have to fill out all this paperwork and get that done and approved. And, there's all the things about physicals. Athletes always have to have physicals every year to get started. How does that all work?
Not this year, actually. Not this year.
Okay, I wasn't sure about that.
Yeah, the New York State Public High School Athletic Association a few months ago actually decided that they waived the need to get new physicals for 2020, that if they had one done for 2019, that it could be used again. And I believe that the reason for that was because not everyone might be having access to a doctor or feels comfortable going to a doctor's office right now or something. To get another physical done in the meantime. So they can actually, not to cut you off, but just to clarify that, they are allowing the 2019 physicals to be used. But I don't know what that means for like freshmen or eighth graders or something like that. Maybe they had one from, if they're like entering high school. I don't know how that change might work, but I'm guessing if anyone had one already, that they're fine.
So, that's interesting. Then from covering these travel baseball leagues, I know it took them quite a while to put together their game protocol. Maybe not a ton of time, but that's just for baseball. And then, how do you do it for soccer or these other sports, field hockey, whatever you're trying to play in the fall? So, yeah, how long do you have to put that together for the league to approve it, for the section to approve it, et cetera, et cetera? Because the baseball games, I was impressed. I mean, with the amount of sanitizing they did, switching the balls out, fans were really good about not picking up a foul ball and throwing it back. I mean, just all the little things that you would never think about. The umpire was standing in different places. So, yeah, it's like, how do you put all that together? Have they already been thinking about it? All really good questions.
And you bring up a good point there, too, even when you bring up the physicals and all of those decisions, because some people I do hear are like, you know what, school's back. Let's just, get back on the field. We know what we're doing. But there are still that many decisions that have to be made as far as, transportation and social distancing, like all the little details of financing or testing, which has been one of the big things, which was also a big element in this, is when I asked the question about, what do we see on the major league level, maybe that can be brought to the high school level. They said, well, one thing that can be brought back was how everyone is social distancing and not touching each other, maybe, and that they're being the example of how those who are doing it properly and are able to come back and play. No new cases in the NBA bubble, no new cases in the NHL bubble, like shows just how what they're doing to be safe. Let's do that too. Wear your mask, all that stuff. But they said the one non-transferable thing, the major non-transferable thing, is how much testing they're doing. They said it's just not financially possible at the high school level, which could prohibit the high school sports from coming back. And I don't think that prohibits practices coming back or within the school coming back. They keep them to those smaller groups within your school. But I do think that might be the reason that prohibits two different schools, like an actual competition. Right now, only fall championships are canceled. That means we're kind of expecting that there might be some sort of schedule or, regional schedule, different kind of league schedule than usual. We talked about more geographically based and even maybe a sectional tournament. But if there is a reason that would knock out any kind of that kind of competition and just leave us to what the colleges are forced to do now, which is, and they do have the means to do more testing than a high school does. but that's why Division III had to fall out, Utica College and Hamilton College and Hartwick College, because the NCAA guidelines of having the testing right within 3 days of a competition was too much for D3 to handle. So high schools definitely can't handle that. And that might be the major reason why we don't see maybe competition happen. But again, those are some of the decisions and thoughts that are still out there right now, like you mentioned, that needs to be figured out. Sometimes that's not thought about when you think of, let's just get back to playing games. On the high school level, there really are so many logistical decisions about how this all plays out to make sure that they get it right.
And when I had Unadilla Valley Athletic Director Matt Osborne on my podcast, he goes, Nate, I don't even know, say we do come back and we're practicing and one student athlete on my team gets a positive test. He goes, I don't know if that means we're done, if that student just has to quarantine, and does everyone else have to get the test and have to go through that process? And then, are we done for the season? Do we all just have to stop for 14 days in quarantine? There was a lot of what ifs, and that's just for one positive test. So that guideline wasn't out there either. So then if you're playing other teams somehow at that point, what does the other school have to do? And there's that domino effect that we were talking about.
Well, you look at Major League Baseball as an example, and I don't even think MLB knows what the answer to that is. They're trying to deal with that with the Marlins, and then with their 18 cases that they had on the team, and then the Phillies, because they were playing in that dugout, so they couldn't play the Yankees the next series. And then now you have the Cardinals games who are being postponed because they're getting cases. So that is a question. But do you just stop completely? And actually, the Marlins and everyone, not only did that team that tested positive stop completely, and the team they played, but the team they were supposed to play next, because they couldn't play the Marlins, the Orioles, after they were, testing positive. So that team also got affected. And the Yankees going to play the Phillies because they would have used the same dugout as the Marlins where they had just tested positive. So, I mean, that's 4 of 30 teams that just got completely shut down for almost an entire week, and in some cases, the whole week. So I don't even know if there's the answer to that. But the question is, to be real, on the high school level, when would you even know that a player might have tested positive? When does that initial test, that question was based off of someone got tested and tested positive. When are they getting tested? Is there going to be protocol for the schools that they have to get tested besides temperature checks, which kind of just tell you in the moment where you are? Doesn't tell you anything about the virus. That's just is your temperature 101 and we should maybe check this out. Yep. But that's based on the foundation, that question of whether that first person, that student athlete tested. When is that initial test going to happen? I don't know if the teams would even have the tests happening, even one, necessarily.
And it's really going to come down to, I think, like, even if they throw this, like, hey, every day when you come to practice, the coach is going to say, hey, how are you feeling today? Do you have any of these symptoms? And, what if someone is asymptomatic? Or, you hate to say it, but what if they want to play so bad, they're like, well, my temperature was a little high, but I think I'm okay today, like all athletes do. But it's like, no, you got to be more responsible than you've ever been in this situation.
Yeah, it's not, but that is the crazy part.
Yeah.
I think you just hit the nail on the head with the main issue with what's going on here. I mean, the virus, yes, that, like, the virus in general is the issue. But if you find the one thing that's causing the most problems for, even society in general, it seems to me that it's the fact that you can spread the virus and have it without having symptoms. Right. It's not even like you need minor symptoms where you could be like, oh, I'm a little sniffly. Maybe I might. No, it's like you could totally nothing, absolutely nothing, and you still have it full on and you're spreading it around. That's the scary thing about this virus. And I'm not ever claiming to be a medical expert. That's what I'm hearing from the medical experts. That's my job, is to ask the questions and hear them and then tell the information back, and try and understand it in a less maybe doctoral word set, more English here. But yeah, you can spread this virus without having symptoms. And that's why I'm saying, like, if there isn't that initial test, if there isn't that one test that question's based off of, like, oh, what if someone gets tested and then is positive? What do we do? I don't even know if the schools and the teams would find out that someone was positive. because that initial test wouldn't have happened and they would have looked fine. And then all of a sudden, who knows how it's spreading. And that is the risk, right? We said this at one point, the whole point here is to mitigate the risk. That's what physical distancing is about. That's why we've stayed home. That's why things have shut down. We didn't want to overwhelm the health system. Are we flattening the curve? That's the medical experts are figuring that out. And then what capacity is there to deal with things if people do need to be hospitalized for it? Can we care for them in the meantime before we get a vaccine maybe that can protect us all or raise our immune systems against it? But and I don't think we have the answers to this, but I'm almost curious about what happens when we get in the fall. The flu season's back, typical flu. It's going to seem like, I don't know how I'd tell the difference between a symptom of that or rather a sign. Unless you're a doctor, you can't determine symptoms. Same thing with concussions. That's a thing that we learn in broadcast is you can't say, oh, look, he has a symptom of a concussion, because we're not doctors. We can't say that, but we can only see signs, which are the things we observe ourselves. So I don't know the difference between a sign of the common flu or, coronavirus. Yeah. Apparently they're going to be pretty similar. So, when you have kids in a group, you already deal with that. It's really complicated, which is why these conversations are so important and why they're still ongoing.